At this time, you can close your prayer books, your machzarim, for a few moments. A word of disclosure. Before I begin the sermon this evening, I want to let you know that my remarks reflect this difficult time in which we are living and make significant mention of the events of October 7th and more. So if you're here with young children, or if this is a topic that proves difficult or triggering for you and makes you uncomfortable, just want you to be aware of that. And if your choice is to step away, we completely understand. It's a tone, I think, that you are not likely used to hearing from me. But above all, I do always try to be truthful. And I'm sharing this truth with you. People often ask me when I begin writing my High Holy Day sermons, and I really never start more than a few days in advance, for a valid reason. The world can and does change in an instant. In 5761, Erev Rosh Hashanah began on the evening of September 17th, 2001, just 6 days after the world as we knew it came crashing down in the wake of the September 11th attacks. Though that day marked the first time in my own adult life that I felt the axis shift, collectively, we all went to sleep on that September 10th in a relatively secure world, ignorant of the cliff face from which we would all be jettisoned the following morning. September 11th proved what I call a precipice moment on a grand scale that most of us could never have predicted. This is exactly why I wait as long as I do to write, and this year proved no different. Because precipice moments always change us irrevocably, drawing a harsh, unforgiving line between the predictable life we lived before and the uncertain reality we face after. As you know so deeply, we've all been living now in another state of precipitous contingency since October 7th, 2023, with its aftershocks of terror in Israel and veiled and outright anti-Semitism here, unlike anything many of us have ever experienced. Of note, this precipice sensibility is not foreign to us. In fact, it echoes through the very heart of this night as we enter the Jewish New Year. Our Rosh Hashanah liturgy proclaims Hayom Harat Ha'olam. Today is the day of the world's birth. And while many of us might jump immediately to Bereshit and the creation story, to God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, the truth is, the story doesn't begin that way. In the very first verses, we learn that the original state of all things was tohu vavohu, utter chaos. As Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove puts it, the biblical story of creation is meant not merely to describe God's hand in fashioning a majestic universe, but to draw attention to God's ongoing efforts to tame the floodwaters of chaos that are ever seeking to burst forth. The creation story is a story about disorder, anarchy, and the persistence of evil, a world both random and erratic that can be upended in any place, at any time. By this telling, Rosh Hashanah is not so much a day to sit back and breathe in the wonders of our providential universe, but a day to sit up, take note, and ask ourselves how best to navigate a world that is shot through with contingency. I cannot shake the horrifying irony that the October 7th attacks occurred on Simchat Torah when we restart the Torah with those very same verses about tohu vavohu, an abyss teeming with wild and waste. This year, I feel that chaos more sharply than ever before. On October 6th, we lived our lives in the before, tethered to a stable and trustworthy reality. But on October 7th, everything came crashing down, thrusting us into an unmoored, turbulent, upside-down world of an endless October 8th. Every day since, we are living in the after. Stunned as we were, and still are, we are now all October 8th Jews. In a recent lecture at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, the brilliant Rabbi Yehuda Kurtzer described why the precipitous effect of October 7th on the mainstream American Jewish community has proven so devastatingly impactful. First, for the second half of the 20th century and nearly the first quarter of the 21st, we assumed that the modern, powerful state of Israel would ensure that our past chaotic experiences of oppression as Jews were no longer a necessary concern. Yet, that October 7th occurred has called that very assumption into question, leaving us wondering if we have returned to that previous cycle of history, the very one we thought was over. And second, we assumed that our democracy would maintain well-operating, ordered, secure societies that would protect us against fascism and totalitarianism. Listen carefully to the three systems of trust that Kurtzer named upon which democracy relies. First, a fair and independent media. Gone. Second, a truly bipartisan political structure. Gone. Third, higher education systems that articulate some version of moral clarity. Gone. We have all witnessed the dissolution of that trust over the last year in particular. And we now find ourselves questioning whether or not the ground upon which we stand is in fact solid, worried if here too we have returned to that previous cycle of history, the very one we thought was over. And this should go without saying. The cycles of history tell us that Jews are the canary in the coal mine. Things may begin with us, but they never end there. So this precipice moment, catalyzed by October 7th, it's not just a Jewish one. We are not just October 8th Jews. We are October 8th Americans, too. And we are drowning in despair. As clergy, my colleagues and I hear this every day. Is it happening again? Will Israel survive? Should I hide that I'm Jewish? Where can my kids go to college and be safe? Where will we go if we have to leave? Will there ever be peace? We are mourning the world we knew before October 7th and grappling with the unbearable weight of living in this after. In Judaism, despair, Yeush it's called, means abandoning all hope for change. And it's such a powerful emotion in Jewish tradition that it can alter not just relationships, but even legal statuses. In Jewish law, if you lose something and despair of ever finding it, you actually lose legal ownership of it. Consider that sort of despair, then, in relation to how we confront our own dissonant, chaotic, precipice moments. When confronted with the immense discomfort and pain brought to bear by devastating losses beyond our control, it's understandable that we'd want to make the situation clear, one way or the other, separating ourselves, letting go if we have to. I confess to you that the depths of sadness I have felt over this past year, well, it is difficult for me to put that into words. I have waged a war within myself in attempts not to succumb to the despair I've felt and feel so deeply. As a result, I found myself turning to the residents of the Warsaw Ghetto for counsel. After all, the Bratslaver Jews were the ones to inscribe on the gates of their prayer space in the ghetto, "Jews, you are forbidden to despair." In particular, I've returned over and over again to Emanuel Ringelblum and the Oyneg Shabbos Collective. Have you heard of the Oyneg Shabbos? Just curious. Wow. The Oyneg Shabbos were a group of Jewish intellectuals who, amid the horrors of Nazi occupation, documented their experiences and preserved Jewish community and culture in the ghetto through soup kitchens, medical centers, and cultural events. And as the ghetto was liquidated, knowing their fate, they still resisted despair, completing as many documents as possible, burying them in milk canisters and metal containers, which were discovered later. That Ringelblum Archive, as it's now called, bears witness to the enduring value of cultural identity and the incredible defiance and resistance of the Oyneg Shabbos, their resilience, even in the darkest of times. Even if there is presently no accessible hope, we can still do something good. In the face of chaos, despair is not the only option. And while hope certainly proves the opposite of despair, I'd argue that in order to get to hope, about which you'll hear tomorrow morning as it happens from Rabbi Leisman, a different step is required first. What in Hebrew we might call omets, the strength to persevere, or better said, resilience. If Yeush, despair, is all about getting as far away from the chaos as possible through letting go, then omets, resilience, proves the force needed to stay in, to hold on. It's the force that keeps us moving forward, step by step, no matter how precarious or unsteady the ground. Unlike how despair yields release and even reprieve from discomfort and pain, resilience catalyzes proximity, connection, and a profound sense of obligation. It binds us tightly both to the tension and to our abiding values as well, the very foundational principles that the chaos otherwise obscures. Back to that creation story, it's noteworthy that after we learn that everything was tohu vavohu, God does not immediately proceed with creating. Instead, the very next verse introduces God hovering just above the surface of the chaos, and only after that moving forward to activate creation. Interestingly, a number of classic commentators suggest that this hovering that God does was actually God pausing to cultivate omets. Think about that. Embedded within the very first story we have, not only of our own origin, but of God and God's relationship to it, is a precipice moment to which God responds first with omets, resilience, and resolve. In the face of the most difficult contingencies, can we too summon the courage not to walk away, but instead to invest ourselves even more deeply, knowing that such a choice is merited regardless of outcome? This new year, will we choose to invest ourselves more fully in Israel and nurture our Zionism? This new year, will we choose to live our Jewish identities proudly and outwardly? This new year, will we choose to seek out and model tolerant dialogue, even when it feels impossible? One of the first researchers on resilience, psychologist Emmy Werner, published a landmark longitudinal study tracking nearly 700 children from the time they were in utero through their 30s. Among all the different factors that determined resiliency, the most determinative was when an individual possessed a, quote, internal locus of control. The belief that we can shape our own outcomes, even when the world around us feels out of control. It's about finding a way to reclaim our agency, to make value and purpose-driven choices, even in the darkest moments. I observed this internal locus of control firsthand when I was in Israel this past December. Our group visited kibbutz near Oz, a quarter of whose residents were murdered or kidnapped on the 7th, with much of the kibbutz utterly desecrated, set ablaze, and destroyed. When we arrived, the smell, still in the air, was a smell I have experienced only once before, in the days and weeks after 9/11 in New York, where I was in seminary at the time. On the kibbutz, the homes whose inhabitants were stolen had hostage posters on their doors. You likely know one of these hostage families, the Bibas family, with parents Yardain and Shiri and their 2 little red-headed boys, Ariel and Kafir. Our group met Amit Rubin, who had been staying there since immediately after the attack, doing the most gruesome and devastating work of caretaking for what remained after every survivor was evacuated. No words adequately describe the depth of this man's unconditional and sacred care of this kibbutz. But Amit had no affect. And when we asked him if he thought that people would one day come back to the kibbutz to live, he said he didn't see how that was possible. But despite that, each afternoon, Amit would go out to tend the kibbutz fields. As he shared, but we will still plant seeds. Though he might not have had readily accessible hope, what Amit did have was omets, resilience, and resolve. And sometimes that is both all we can ask for and also all we really need. In the face of turmoil, we can throw up our hands, respond with utter helplessness and despair, Yeush, or we can insert ourselves into the story with all of its tumult, grab a little piece of agency, omets, and knowing we may not even be able to see promise or possibility, still make a choice to do what we can to be a participant in the narrative process as it unfolds. This deepest truth lies in the fact that Judaism reminds us of the strength within each of us to hold on. That in the face of despair, we can, in fact, keep moving forward, little step by little step. And even into the unknown, we can affirm that we too will yet plant seeds. Gemar Chatima Tova. In a new year that we pray might bring wholeness and peace, may we all be inscribed for goodness and for life. Shana Tova.